Steam Locomotives in Miniature at the Steam Workshop. This is part 5. Working on a 5-inch gauge steam locomotive, cleaning up the crossheads and some painting. On the screen at the moment, I know this looks like it's in reverse order, but this is not my doing. Depending on how busy I am, I go into the Steam Workshop about once a week normally, and this week, while I've been working at my other job, the parts have been painted. Here's the boiler wrapper looking resplendent in its coat of etch primer, and as you saw in the previous image, the side tanks, cab roof and spectacle plate have also been painted in the etch primer. And all this painting has been done by Dave, who works full-time at the Steam Workshop, and a very good job it is indeed. This is the chassis, somewhat different to the last time you saw it, as you can see here in this flashback. This has made a big difference to the job. Now I can crack on with the more important and for me more interesting part of putting the bits back together. But before I can actually start putting the parts back together, there are 1 or 2 more jobs to do, and the first job is to remove the slide bars, clean them up and then clean up the crosshead. The dummy valve guides on the steam chest haven't been painted because they still need some attention. When I saw the CNC machine in action, I thought I'll take a quick break from putting this engine back together and visit John Holroyd's area of the Steam Workshop. And here you see the CNC machine in action, all programmed by John, actually doing what it's supposed to do. Cut pieces of metal under computer control. So what's happening here? Why is the CNC machine machining this shape in a piece of cast iron, which is actually a cylinder? And to explain this, here's one that John prepared earlier. This is the other side. So what is this? I was a bit puzzled. I thought, well, it looks very nice. It looks quite happy. And believe it or not, these are the actual ports in the port face of this cylinder for a miniature steam locomotive. But this miniature steam locomotive isn't really so miniature. It's a 7 1/4 inch gauge 464 type locomotive. And for any viewers who don't get this, 464 refers to the wheel arrangement. A 4-wheel bogie at the front, 6 main driving wheels, and another 4 trailing wheels bringing up the rear. It's quite a beast. John explained that it was built in 1912, and I think it appeared in the magazine Model Engineer in 1913. And these are the cylinders for it, and they're far too small for an engine of this size, as you can clearly see. These cylinders actually plug in to the main valve chest. It's a very strange arrangement that I've never seen before. So what John's having to do is reverse engineer this project, hence the strange looking ports on the new cylinders that John's made for the engine. In this clip he's setting up the Bridgeport milling machine to bore the cylinders, which for me is something I've never done. I would normally use my forge or chuck for this, but this is a proper engineering workshop, not quite like the one I have at home. And unlike me, John is also a proper engineer. He was telling me he built his first engine, which he thinks was a Stuart No. 10, when he was 7 years old. So he's a very experienced engineer. This is the almost completed firebox wrapper for the 5-inch gauge Great Western Railway Grange locomotive that John is also working on. The quality of work speaks for itself, just look at the detail. Anyway, back to reality. I'm busy with my very small spanner, carefully unspannering this bolt, and eventually it will come out. It was the longest bolt in the world, I think. But anyway, I'm removing the crosshead guide bars. Then I put them in the bead blasting cabinet to get rid of most of the rust, and now I'm cleaning them up with a piece of grey Scotch-Brite. I think that the colour of the Scotch-Brite must denote the type of grit that's embedded in it, because this seems to be a little bit more tenacious than the green stuff I normally use in my workshop. Or maybe this grey Scotch-Brite is just newer than the stuff I use in my workshop. I'm really not sure on this, and I never speak about anything that I don't really know about. Quite unlike a girlfriend that I once had. I've really not had much luck with women over the years. My first wife died from eating poisoned mushrooms, and my second wife died of a broken neck because she wouldn't eat the poisoned mushrooms. That, by the way, for those internet people with no sense of humour whatsoever, was a joke. Not a very good joke, but a joke nevertheless, and I'm pleased to announce that both of my wives are okay. As you can see, I've just been cleaning up the steel support bracket for the valve gear that hangs off the crosshead, and in this clip I'm refitting the bracket to the crosshead using the small bolts provided, trying really hard not to shear them off. I'm temporarily refitting the link pin just so I don't lose it. It's not going to be long now before I can start reassembling this engine, give it an air test, set the valves and get it well on its way to completion. Because of the condition of this engine, and if you watch the first video you'll see how bad it was. Well, in fact, no, it was worse than that. I just didn't video the engine when I first saw it, so I dismantled it before I started videoing. But as I just said, because of the condition of this engine in the first place, it's never going to be a perfect, pristine example of a miniature steam locomotive. And some of the parts are not particularly worn, but there's little bits of damage here and there. But have you looked closely at a working full-size steam locomotive lately, you will see many items of damage on those. Rough paintwork, bits of rust, bits of this, bit of that. So this will sort of have that kind of quality about it when it's finished. There's more than enough collective experience from the people who work at Steam Workshop full-time and part-time to build one of these from scratch. It's not a difficult job, time-consuming but not difficult. But then what's the point? What's the point in doing this if I can just make a new one? Well, the point is, this engine's been on the planet for quite a while. It's older than some people I know, and it will be good to see it put back into working order. And in case you think you've just seen this, no you haven't. This is the other side. I've turned the locomotive over, and I'm refitting the bracket to the crosshead on this side, followed by fitting the link pin so I don't lose this one either. Often in my home workshop I work on stationary engines. I do have a steam locomotive that I run around the garden, and it's a 7 1/4 inch gauge titch, but that never needs repairing because I built it right in the first place. It uses ball racers just about everywhere, apart from on the main motion, the connecting rod and the coupling rods, and they've never really worn out, so I just leave it there. I pull it out, test the boiler once a year, and steam it round the garden about maybe once a year if I get time, because I'm usually busy doing this. It's very common to see red paint in between the frames of model steam locomotives, and normally from my experience the paint used is Humbrol number 19. This is more or less post office red or pillar box red. It's not to be confused with the shade of red paint used to paint the buffer beams. That is normally vermilion, or buffer beam red. On this engine, just to save some time and the fact that it's a bit unnecessary because you can hardly see it for the side tanks because it's such a short engine, I'm not going to paint in between the frames with this red paint. I'm just going to limit it to the axles as you see here, and also the water pump that fits down in between the frames. And that should answer anyone who's thinking, what's that thing in the middle of the axle? I wonder what that is. Well, that's an eccentric that drives the water pump. And the idea of this is, as the engine is going round the track, the axles are revolving, the eccentric's revolving, the pump's going in and out, and as the pump goes in and out, it's taking water from the side tanks and then recirculating it back to the side tanks. But here's the clever bit. The pipe from the water pump connects to a T-piece, and one of the junctions of the T-piece is piped to the check valve on the boiler. The other junction of the T-piece goes to a water valve, and if you open the water valve, it allows water back into the tank. If you close the water valve, the water is pumped into the boiler. Very, very simple. Very easy to operate. By carefully setting the position of this water valve, it's easy enough to control how much water goes into the boiler and how much water goes back into the tank. Finding the correct setting for a water bypass valve can take a while to get used to. But once you get the setting just right, the axle pump will pump just enough water back into the boiler to keep the water level in the gauge glass more or less constant. On the downside, you don't get anything for nothing, so in order to pump the water into the boiler, it does use some of the engine's power. Personally, I prefer a couple of injectors. That's the painting of the axles finished. I'll just leave the wheels on the shelf for the paint to dry. That's it for now. Thanks for watching, and I hope you found it useful.